Hello, and welcome to Scripting Fundamentals in PowerShell. I will be going through the basics of PowerShell. The first thing I will cover is what is a variable. Variables in programming are a reference or a container that can store a number, a string, or even a list of things in it. It can also store nothing, or null in this case. Null in programming stands for nothing. Basically, whenever you see a variable, it's used to store some sort of information. Variables in PowerShell will always start with a $sign. It's a little different from other programming languages, but it's very important whenever you're naming variables to choose a name that makes sense. And it should be something that makes sense to what sort of information you're putting into it. So for example, if you're going to have a variable number, it makes sense to put some number variable type in it. You don't want to have a variable name and then you just put something completely random in it. Sort of like when you're moving and packing. Let's say you're putting glass dishes into a box or container, you wouldn't want to label it clothes, because then it could obviously get damaged. So in PowerShell, you want the variable name to somewhat relate to what is going to be in the variable. For example, if you have a password that you're going to save to a variable, you can name it just $password. Another thing is that PowerShell is not case sensitive, meaning it doesn't matter if you have capital letters in one variable and not capital letters when you try to use it again later. It will still read that as the same variable. So for example, you have $score and $score with some uppercase and lowercase. PowerShell will read it as the same variable. Another thing I'll mention here is naming conventions that we sometimes use. So here you can see where it starts with user password with lowercase on the first word, and the next word is capitalized. This is called camel case. Then beneath it, where it has an underscore between the two parts, is called snake case. So as a user underscore PW, that is called snake case. All right, so let's discuss how to actually create variables in PowerShell. So like I said before, always use a $sign to create variables. So let's create a variable called name. In this, I will store my name, Chris. So now when I press enter, notice that doesn't actually output anything. So if I want to see what is actually inside of this variable, I can type $name, press enter, and here it will show the output as to what's stored in the variable. So now if I change the capital letters, right, if I make it all uppercase, again, still shows the same thing because again, PowerShell is not case sensitive. Try this again with, switch it up. This is again. So what I did there is I'm actually just pressing tab, and it's changing it to what I did it earlier too. But if you do it like that, again, still shows it the same way. So for command history, it's very important that when you're typing, and we'll be making a lot of mistakes, if you want to go back to what you previously typed, you can just press the up arrow. This will recall your last commands that you put in. This will save a lot of time when you're making mistakes. Alright, so now I will go into a bit of the command history using the up arrow. So here we've got the stuff I previously typed, so I can just go and type clear or CLS, they both do the same thing. Now, what I previously had is gone, but it still remembers the command history. So I can go ahead and press the up arrow, and just type CLS, clear, before that name. So I can go through all of these, all the ones I've done. Again, with the up and down arrow, you can go through them all. So let's say, for instance, we go to have our name up here. We go to type clear. Oh, I didn't mean to type clear. I meant to type clear. So again, just go up here, backspace, and type clear. So this may not seem like a big thing right now, but whenever you're typing much longer commands and just mistype one letter, it can be very useful. Now we need to talk about variable types. Variable types are what is stored into those containers or variables. For this class, we will need to know 4 variable types. PowerShell will recognize these as different things. The first one is the most simple, Boolean. This is just true or false. This doesn't have to store much. It is only 1 or 0, true or false. So again, that's the most simple one. The next one is numbers. These can be positive, negative, and decimals, but it will actually be saved as a number so you can do mathematical operations on these. The next one is arrays, which is just a list of values, an ordered list of values. The last one we will talk about is strings, which as you can see is just text. An easy way to remember these is either nabs or bands, whichever one's easier for you. One thing to note here is that the numbers variable type is a combination of multiple types, such as integer, double, and float. We kind of just lump these all together as numbers. Before I go into all of the different variable types, let's first see how do I assign something to a certain variable. So values are assigned to something using the assignment operator, which is going to be your equal sign. It's very important also to get the order correct, so you will always have your variable name on the left, then you will have the assignment operator, which is the equal sign, then you will have whatever you're assigning to that variable on the right. In our first example, we have num of student is equal to 17. So PowerShell is taking that number 17 and it's storing it into the variable num of students. The next one is going to be a string. So we have student name is equal to Bobby. So Bobby is being stored inside of student name. So now if we wanted to see what is actually stored inside of this variable, we would just type in the variable name all by itself, then press enter. And it would show us what is stored inside of that name. So if we put $value equals 5, then typed $value in its own line, it would then display to us what is stored inside of that variable. Alright, so now let's go ahead and try to store something into a variable. So for instance here, I will put $number equals 23. So this will now store 23 into number. So if I want to see what's in that, go ahead and type number, and press enter, and it shows us 23. So again, notice that I'm putting the variable on the left, then the equal sign, and then the number on the right. So now let's go ahead and try to do this the wrong way. Let's put 23 equal to $num. So as you can see here on the left, it's showing that we have an error already. So that's a good sign to see that you're probably doing something wrong. So if I try to press enter, it's going to give me an error here. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to store num, which is not set to anything yet. So it's trying to store nothing into 23. So you can't store anything into a number. It has to be stored into a variable. Alright, so now I can talk about our first variable type. So the first one is Boolean variables. So again, Boolean values are true or false. And in order to assign a Boolean value, you must type whatever the variable name is, then your assignment operator, which is, again, is the equal sign, then either $true or $false. Make sure you don't forget the $sign here, because if you do, then you will get an error. Something to note here is that whenever changing a variable type to a Boolean, any non-zero value will read as true, while 0 will read as false. So let's say, for instance, I have the number 3, and I force it to be a Boolean, that will be true. Alright, so now let's go ahead and assign some Boolean variables. Let's go ahead and clear my screen. So let's go ahead and type Boolean underscore var equals true. Alright, so again now here, what did I forget? I forgot the $sign. I'm going to press my up arrow, and go back, and I'm going to add the $sign on true. So now I'll check what's stored inside of this Boolean variable. So you can see it kind of tries to autocomplete here. So if I just press tab, it'll pull that up for me. And this can be very useful so you don't mess up in your spelling and it's just more efficient. So now it'll show me true. The other thing I'd like to note here is that whenever you want to see what type of variable something is, what you can do is type the name of the variable, so Boolean underscore var, and then you can type .get type, and then close your parenthesis, and then press enter, and it will show me the type here, Boolean. So now let's go ahead and force a number to a Boolean. So I can show you what I was talking about earlier. So let's do num equals 11. So now num will be, can show it is 11. So now I will force this to be a Boolean. So you do an open square bracket, Boolean, close the square bracket. Now I'll type $num. Now when I press enter, it should show me true, because anything that is not 0 again is true when it's forced to Boolean. Alright, so our next variable type is string variables. So a string is a collection of characters saved as a single variable. So strings are designated by the quotation marks. This designates a string. For example, here you have a string can be any combination. So this is done in quotes. You can have numbers in here, you can have letters, or you can have just a single word. Something to note here is that if you set a number as a string, the computer does not know it as a number, and it simply sees a character. This creates some interesting math results. So for example here, if you have 8 in quotation marks plus 9 in quotation marks, and then equals, it will come out to be 89, because it's adding the two strings together. So now whenever you're entering multiple variables, there's a couple ways to do this. First one is just line by line put, for example, num1 equals 2, num2 equals 5, num3 equals 8. Another method that is available is you can put num1, num2, num3 equals, and then put 2, 5, 8. So the second option allows you adding multiple variables simultaneously. As personal preference, I prefer option 1 since it's easier to read and maintain, and especially because whenever you're using commas, which I'll go over into next, is used when you're assigning things into an array. So our next variable type is array variables. So array variables you can think of as a list. You can have a list of numbers, strings, and even a list of lists. So overall, arrays are just a list of values. When assigning multiple values, they are separated by commas. So before we create an array of things, we first want to create an empty array, which you see at the bottom here, or an array that has nothing stored inside of it. To do this, you do $array equals, and then your @, and then parentheses. This will assign $array to be an array variable type. So you may be wondering, why would we ever do this? Well, you may be asking the user to give you some type of values, and then you'd want to store this into an array. So you'd first have to make that blank array, then ask the user for values that would then be put into the array you created. So if you already know what you want to be in your array, then you can create your array like this, $numbers equals, and your @ and then in parentheses, put all of the numbers you want, separated by commas. You can also do this with strings. So here you've got the Stooges, Larry, Curly, and Moe, again separated by commas. Since they're strings, you have the quotes around them. And then down here, you can do another one, user data equals, and so we're adding, here we've got strings and numbers mixed together. So you can do this with or without the @ whenever you're assigning multiple values. Alright, so now let's go ahead and make an empty array. We've got array, assignment operator, and then @ in the parentheses. So now we have an empty array. I can check the type of this again using get type. It shows here an object, over here, array. Alright, so let's go ahead and try to put something in this array. So we'll do array equals 1, 2, 3, and close a parenthesis. Alright, so now 1, 2, and 3 should be stored in this array. So let's go ahead and display this array now. Alright, so there we go, 1, 2, and 3. Something to note here is that an array should display the items on their own line. As you can see here, it's got 1, 2, and 3 on the different lines. So let's try adding some strings to an array. So let's go array2 equals @ open parenthesis, let's go ahead and put car, van, and bike. Okay, so now these should be stored in there. So let's go ahead and display this. There we go, car, van, and bike. Okay, so now let's try mixing some numbers with some strings in an array. Let's go array3, equal sign. So let's go and put 1, 14, truck, 33, and car. All right. So again here, we see that there's an error here. And then we've got this one as a different color over here. So I'm going to press enter. It should give us an error. It's going to try to tell us a truck cannot be used in expression or statement. So what did I forget there? Let's go ahead and press our up arrow. Since it's a string, let's do have quotation marks. See, it's going to show us the error in car there. Let's go and add the quotation marks on car as well. So when I press enter, it should work. And we can view the array3. So 1, 14, truck, 33, and car. So one last thing to note here is that while it's good practice to have the at and the parentheses here, they're not completely necessary when defining arrays. PowerShell will actually recognize an array just from the commas alone. But again, it's good practice because when other people look at your code, they can easily see that it is an array. But I will show you. Okay, let's go and just change one of these values to show that it works. And again, array3. So it does work, but again, having those at and parentheses is good practice. All right, now a quick note on the range operator. The range operator is denoted by 2 dots, and it will be between 2 numeric values. The range operator creates an array by taking all of the numbers from the first number to the second number. This can go forwards or backwards. So for instance here, we've got $b is equal to 5.8. So this will create an array from, it will be 5, 6, 7, and 8. It will include those 4 numbers. And same thing backwards, it would be 8, 7, 6, and 5. So real quick, we'll go over an example of that. So I'll go $a is equal to 1.10. So now let's go ahead and check the type of this. Get type. And again here, so it shows object and array. So if I go and display A, it should show 1 through 10. So now again here, as I mentioned before, it is always good practice to include the at in parentheses. So if someone goes to look at your code, they can easily tell this is an array. So again, this will be the same thing here, 1 through 10. So now I'll go over implicit and explicit typecasting. So first we have implicit typecasting. So implicit typecasting is when you're allowing PowerShell to assign whatever variable type it wants. So for instance, here we have $num equals 6. So PowerShell is going to assume that you want a number here. And then we have $string equals words and quotes. So PowerShell is going to assume that you want a string here. In the below example, we see that we're using the read host function, which will always implicitly cast input as a string variable, even if you type in a number. So if we do number equals read host, and then please enter a number, you're going to want to be giving it a number. However, since you haven't explicitly told it that you want an integer or some sort of number, it's going to assume it is a string variable type because of the quotation marks. So now we have explicit type casting. This fixes the read host issue. So if you were to put number equals read host, please enter a number. Obviously, like I said, it's going to be a string. So in order to fix that, you would have to explicitly put int in front of number, and then this will make it become a number variable type whenever the user enters something. So now I'll go ahead and give you guys an example of this. Let's go and do num equals 12. Let's go ahead and check the type of this. So we'll do get type, as we see, it is an integer 32. So what happens if I do num2 equals, in quotes, 12? So that is obviously going to be a string because of the quotes, right? So we could actually force this into an integer by putting num2 equals to 12. Even with the quotes here, it will see this as now an integer 32, a number. So now you can also force things into being a string. So let's go and do num3. So before this, we can put a string, and we can put equals 12. So now we see num3 is equal to 12. We can check the type of that, and it is a string. Alright, so now real quickly, I'm going to go over the read host command. I mentioned it earlier. So let's go and put variable name, set it equal to, we put read host, and here we will put please enter your name. So now what this is going to do is when I press enter, it's going to ask the user to type in please enter your name. See there it says please enter your name, so I will put Chris. And so now what it's going to do is it's going to store Chris into the name variable. So if I type name, we'll show, there we go, Chris. So let's do this with age. So age is equal to read host, please enter your age. So again here, it's going to ask, please enter your age. Let's put 25. So if I go $age, it will show me 25. Cool. Okay. However, if we type age.getType, what this is going to show is that it is a string variable, and we want this to be a number. So the reason it did that is because, as I mentioned earlier, it's implicitly casting this as a string. So what we have to do in order to fix that is put int before age equals read host, please enter your age. So now we'll put 25 and check age 25. Now we will check the type of this. And there we go. As you can see, it is now an integer 32. Alright, so here are some exercises that I definitely want you guys to go and try to do. So I'd recommend you pause the video and go through and try to attempt and do these exercises, and then I will go over the answers. Okay, so first we have, what is the difference between $x equals 7 and $x equals 7 in quotation marks? So $x equals 7 is an integer variable type, and then $x equals 7 in quotation marks is a string variable type. Again, this is because of the quotation marks. So now we have, what is the difference between x equals 1, 2, 3 and x equals, all in one quotation marks, 1, 2, 3, and then x equals 1, 2, 3 separated by commas and having their own quotation marks. So the first one is going to be an array of 3 integers. That's because there's no quotation marks, so they're integers, and then the commas turns it into an array. So then the second one, we have the quotation marks, so it sees these commas as just characters. So this is actually just one big string. It's like hello world, but in this case 1, 2, 3. So again, that's just going to be one string. And then we have x equals 1, 2, 3. So here we've got the commas separating each one, and they each have their own quotation marks, so they become their own string variable types. So this is an array of 3 strings. So next we have create 2 variables, x equals 3 and y equals 4, in quotation marks, and add them together. So what happens here is it sees 3 first and then 4 second, So it's assuming they're both integers because the first one's an integer. And so adding these two together would give you 7. Now if you were to flip these and have the 4 in quotation marks first, it would make it 43 because it sees the string variable type first and then the 3. So it adds them together and makes 43. Now we have assigned the number 789 to one array with a name of your choice using the range operator. So this one would be very easy. You would just put $, whatever you want to name the array, so $array equals, and then 7 dot dot 9. Then we have assigned 5 to variable a, then close your PowerShell window, and then open a new one and see if $a exists. So if you do this, it would delete it. It would no longer exist once you reopen it. Alright, so just to recap what we went over what is a variable, which these are containers that store some type of value. We went over types of variables, which are Boolean, numbers, arrays, and strings. And then we went over assigning values to variables, which is done with the equal sign, which is the assignment operator. And then lastly, we went over explicit versus implicit type casting.